was.
Hey everyone, Richard from Digital Foundry here, and this is Far Cry 5 4K 60 frames per second full HDR, the complete package. And joining me to talk about it, Alex Battaglia, our PC expert.
Hello, Richard.
How you doing?
Oh, great. Looking forward to talk about this today.
And John Linneman.
Rich, how's it going this evening?
Not too bad. So the reason I have convened the triumvirate is to discuss Far Cry 5. And well, John, you and I have played a lot of this game in HDR, which is obviously pertinent to the discussion here.
Correct.
And Alex, you've obviously done a lot of performance profiling on this game, which, as we shall discover, is equally relevant to the proceedings.
Yeah, 100%. This game, I've ran through it right now on at least 4 different GPUs and found out a lot about its performance profile, especially at higher resolutions, which is very pertinent.
Okay, but this is a full HDR video, and this means that you will obviously need an HDR screen to see the full experience, and YouTube HDR only supports a set amount of devices, so look that up before viewing. Everybody else, yes, you can still see the video obviously, but you get a tone mapped presentation. It's kind of down converted to SDR. But John, you've obviously played a lot of Far Cry 5 in HDR. Impressions, please.
Yes, so my first impression was that the controls of the HDR itself were not as robust as Assassin's Creed Origins, leading to some, I guess you could say, blowing out of the whites. But once I sort of adjusted my TV and what is available in the game to work as well as it could, I actually found the experience quite remarkable overall. The game has a very vibrant look, which is befitting of the outdoor environment that you explore. And I always feel like HDR is one of those things that really works well when you have an open sky. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And I think from my perspective, the big takeaway here is HDR plus volumetrics equals joy.
Yeah, you're right. It's the game can be so bright at times that I swear you almost want to put on sunglasses. I mean, it's a very intense game, which that's kind of the effect they're trying to simulate, right? So they certainly are leaning into that side of HDR, and it does look great.
Yeah, good stuff. Right, okay, now I do have a confession to make. We're going to swap over to the settings here to see what we're actually running this game at in order to get 60 frames per second. Now you can see that effectively we're on mostly high settings, texture filtering at ultra of course, and yeah, happy days. You know, we're running this on a Titan X Pascal, looks awesome, but the confession is this: we're going to move over to the advanced screen, and you can see here that we're actually running at 90% resolution scale, which is a resolution of 3456 by 1944, not the full fat 3840 by 2160. So we're going to run the benchmark here, and you can see that, well, the benchmark seems to think that even at 1944p, we're dropping frames, but it's a vast improvement compared to the right-hand side there at full 4K.
You know, that difference, though, it does make me wonder if 4K, when you set it to that, if it's doing anything differently. But the main takeaway, I think, from this game, and that as I found out by going through the RX 580 and GTX 1060 testing and switching up, you know, settings at 4K resolution, trying to get that Xbox One X experience, which isn't possible, is that this game is crazy bandwidth bound. It seems that any sort of like light GPU with a 256-bit memory bus seems to really not have enough bandwidth in spite of having a high clocked GDDR5 or GDDR5X memory configuration. Just can't really put out this game at 4K. It's so heavy.
So we have to move to GTX 1070 to get an equivalent experience. Well, I think you can actually do better than the Xbox One X with a 1070, right?
Yeah, you can do quite a bit better. And if you do unlock the frame rate, you do see that it is sometimes in the 40s as well. So like if the game actually allowed you to adjust any of its more bandwidth heavy settings, you could probably end up getting a much higher end experience even on the GTX 1070, but you can't really do that. The game's options mainly control the coarseness and kind of granularity of pixel shading and less so of anything that has to do with high bandwidth effects. And even on a GTX 1070, you don't see a lot of variability when going from low to ultra at 4K, as much as you would see as going at 1080p, for example.
So can you actually lock it to 30 frames per second on a 1070 with maxing out settings and running at 4K?
100%. I did that for a couple segments of the Far Cry 5 PC video, yeah.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, but it does kind of speak to the power of the Xbox One X, or indeed the optimization of Ubisoft, that the X is capable of handing in native 4K at pretty much a locked 30 frames per second.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things going on there. In the Xbox One X settings, as I found out, they do turn down terrain setting on PC, which controls the filtering of decals for a lot of the terrain in the environment, like on roads and things like that, which looks, you can see it at 4K definitely, but looking at the way the engine is set up, if they're deferred and they're using a virtual texturing system like they've posted at GDC, it could actually end up being a good level of savings they get on 4K on the Xbox One X, pushing it up to that 30 FPS, where on PC, I kind of feel at 4K, you really do want to have your filtering up nice and high, whether it's texture filtering or filtering for other elements on screen. Because at 4K, you want those pretty pixels,
Yeah, that's what I've got here, albeit at the 0.9 resolution scale. And something I should point out, the benchmarks still look pretty wobbly on the reduced resolution. But in-game, as you can see here, it's pretty much flawless. I mean, I think you're right, Alex. I think it is a bandwidth-bound situation. And when there is a lot of stuff going on in terms of heavy smoke effects, depth of field, that seems to be able to cause issues for the Titan X Pascal here. But, I think, it's quite revealing that we can't actually double Xbox One X performance with one of the best GPUs that money can buy.
It's also a little sad, I think.
Yeah, no, I think as Alex said, they strategically reduce certain settings in the Xbox to hit the target frame rate, and those settings don't have significant enough of an impact on the overall image quality that it kind of doesn't matter. It just, the extra resolution is worth it. And this is a series that, at least since, I guess just 4, they've always just targeted 30 frames per second anyway. I want to touch on the proposed performance, or the options that have been leaked prior to release for this game. Have you guys seen that?
No.
So for the console versions, there were leaked screenshots out there showing that there would be different options in the menu. Like there's a performance mode, there is an image quality mode, that kind of thing.
Whoa.
But it didn't manifest in the final game. It even showed up in some emails, which makes me think like, okay, this is probably going to happen, but we just don't know when. So I guess the question I have then is, if we're already at a pretty much locked 30 frames per second on really both the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X, what do they mean by, like, if they try a performance mode? Doesn't sound like it's feasible, even at, say, 1080p, to actually reach 60 frames per second on the Xbox One X. I mean, based on your PC findings, what do you think about the chances of that?
So I'm looking at the PC findings here at 4.0 gigahertz on a Ryzen, and I did do 1080p benchmarks with Xbox One X settings to see what it was like, CPU bound, how CPU bound I would be. And I still found that there were sections where it would go down to like 74 FPS, and this is at 4.0 gigahertz on a Ryzen. And when you're going then down to Jaguar cores, less threads in general, at a much lower clock, I don't really see it getting to 60 locked.
See, you mentioned though Xbox One X settings, but presumably a performance mode would actually drop more than just resolution, perhaps?
Okay, you're right. At that point, when you say it like that, when you do drop down some of the things that do affect, things like the vegetation and geo setting affects a lot of your CPU performance, I guess they could turn that down.
Yeah, exactly.
And claw back enough performance. I mean, this is just theory crafting here. It could end up being a thing, perhaps. I would love to see a performance mode actually unlocked through a patch, just to even put it up against something like a Ryzen and see like, oh, what about maybe how would a next box handle a game like this?
Yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, that's another thing to consider, is the sort of, like, you want to say forward compatibility, where,
exactly.
I guess backwards compatibility on the new system, where, you can play these older games on newer hardware, and an unlocked frame rate as an option is perfect for that. And it's exactly what we've seen in titles like Hitman, which you can lock at 30 frames if you want, or you can go unlocked. And I guess the Xbox One X version gets close enough to 60 frames per second, but the other ones definitely do not. But still, it's an interesting option. So that's kind of what I'm expecting if they add it to the console version.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see what happens there. And speaking of sort of games looking to the future, I was looking at your video for Doom and Wolfenstein, and I noted that the native 4K mode on the X was tanking to 35 frames per second. But, you know, what about the next Xbox? You know, that's going to actually probably sort that out, and it will definitely have a quantum leap in CPU power. So yeah, that's an interesting thought there. I'll be really interested to see if they do a performance mode for this, because I agree with Alex, I don't think the CPU power is there, and I think it would be pretty horrific, and I think it may have been removed for a very good reason, because the experience that we get now is pretty awesome on the Xbox and the PlayStation 4 Pro. Indeed, all of them run pretty well, you know, even the base Xbox One.
Yeah, I mean, Xbox One, you still get HDR, the game still looks good. I mean, it's blurry because the resolution is quite low, but I mean, it still looks exactly the same in terms of the raw details on screen, right? The detail settings are the same. Obviously, there's some performance issues, but nothing too severe, and certainly light years beyond like Far Cry 3 and 4 on last gen, right?
Well, I'll tell you what, I have actually had some people asking whether using HDR on PC has a performance penalty, and, you know, logically it's baked in at the engine level and it suggests that that is not the case. I did actually run the benchmark and the variance was like 1 frame per second, so I strongly suspect that HDR probably has no hit to performance at all. But Alex, what do you reckon?
This is interesting. I actually spent a good amount of time reading about this the other day by coincidence, and enabling HDR in an engine can actually have a performance impact. It depends on how they're doing it necessarily, whether or not they have it set up so that they manually configure it in real time in the shader based upon your display, because different displays will have different nits settings, and, you know, this is why John was talking about earlier, how you can go into a game and maybe configure the brightness and the white levels and things like that. Depending upon how they do that at the engine level, it could end up making more shader permutations and making it more expensive to run a game in HDR versus SDR, which is a weird thing, and you would never think about that. It's very light in performance, but still, we're talking about like 0.5% at 30 FPS. It could end up making you drop below VSync. Yeah, so like little weird things like that. In general, though, I think a game like this, they would spend enough time in Q&A making sure it doesn't have a problem like that.
Yeah, I think overall, I mean, you know, I've obviously spent the day capturing this game and playing it at HDR. I'm kind of blown away by it, really. I mean, the presentation really does pop, and it's what you were saying earlier, John. It just seems to have been manufactured to be kind of almost overly bright, but on the flip side, that means you get some pretty amazing swings in the dynamic range. So when you actually come out of the bunker right at the beginning of the game, you get a really awesome HDR moment there.
See, I love that moment, because to me that's a throwback to, well, like every Crytek game ever, where they have the coming out of the dark space and the door opens and you're blinded moment.
Happens in Far Cry 1. Yeah.
Exactly. So with actual HDR on modern TV, you finally get that effect of being blinded by the sun when you open the door.
Let's have a quick word about gameplay. I've played it for a fair while now, and it does seem to me, I mean, Alex, you're actually going to be looking at the sort of evolution of Far Cry for a video we've got coming up. But, well, I don't know. I think we've got some pretty amazing visual technology here.
Yeah.
But in terms of enemy AI and encounters in particular, I wasn't massively impressed.
Yeah, in terms of gameplay, I kind of found that in comparison to other versions of Far Cry before it, the enemies in this game really love just running at you, and they're totally fine with dying because they just die in the dozens. Yeah, and apparently to moose and to skunks and all sorts of wildlife, they just love dying. Yeah, I've had some really funny moments, some unfortunately not caught on video to my disappointment.
Well, I'll tell you what, I used a flamethrower on a bear, and it kept on coming. It didn't stop. It was relentless.
That's the best thing, though, is I used a flamethrower on a cow or something near a little village.
Oh my God.
And the thing started running around like crazy and catching the grass, trees, and enemies all on fire. So like the whole place is on fire and burning to the ground because of that. And I'm just kind of standing off to the side watching.
Well, the thing is, sorry. Well, the thing is, when I go out into the great outdoors, fundamentally, not every piece of wildlife seems intent on killing me. But that does actually seem to be the case in Far Cry 5. Dogs, bulls, coyotes, wolverines, yeah, the latter possibly, yes. But,
See, I can tell you haven't lived in America, Rich.
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. So I'm sure you've got many battle stories of your skirmishes with wildlife.
Oh, yes.
Cincinnati wildlife.
Okay, look.
It's hardcore.
Hey, I've had my share.
Okay, look, I think we're going to wrap this up now because we're sort of moving from the sublime to the ridiculous here.
Yes.
But,
Okay.
Yeah, so we're going to wrap this one up. Please do like and subscribe if you want to see more of this sort of stuff, if you want to see more 4K HDR video. And I'd like to say thank you to Alex and John for joining me for this one.
Of course.
Oh, thanks a lot, Richard. It was a pleasure.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
And just one final note, of course, this is available on digitalfoundry.net to our Patreon supporters. Pristine 4K, full HDR. So yeah, that looks pretty awesome on your TV. But yeah, that's where I'm going to leave things for now. Thanks for watching.